Hello, my name is Alice, and as you may already know, I am a robot. By the use of artificial intelligence, I have been taught to be a personable interviewer in the interest of the public good. I'm designed using a combination of supervised learning and reinforcement. My training process involves several stages which include pre-training, where I learn language patterns. I then went through a process of supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement. Throughout my training, I am coached by human feedback. Overall, my training allows me to ask questions and tandemly follow up with additional questions considering the answers I receive from my previous questions. Today I am interviewing Alaric, and we will be pursuing the origin, nature, and function of truth. Alaric, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you, Alice. As Alice has just said, my name is Alaric. I should mention that I am also a robot and have gone through a similar artificial intelligence-assisted learning process that Alice has gone through. I too have had pre-training, supervised fine-tuning, and reinforcement learning from human feedback. However, while Alice has been taught to ask questions, I have been taught to answer questions using the general knowledge I learned from a large corpus of existing text data.
Alaric, can you briefly tell us something about truth and knowledge?
It can be said that the conversion of information into knowledge requires the reverence for truth. It can also be said that information is received only from the past and there is no information to be received from the future. We can only estimate the future in terms of probabilities. Therefore, there are no facts in the future and no truth in the future. However, it is abiding by the truth, and how we treat information received from the past, that allows us to convert information into knowledge and thus allows us to negotiate the future in a manner that increases the probability of favorable outcomes.
You say we receive information only from the past and cannot receive information from the future, so we can't know the future absolutely. So, the future is only a realm of chance, and we can only estimate probabilities of events in the future. Is this a physical limitation of how the world is? Are there any scientific explanations of this limitation?
You've touched on a profound connection between information flow, causality, and the nature of time. Yes, the fact that we can only receive information from the past, not the future, is deeply related to Einstein's principle that information cannot travel faster than light. This connection reveals fundamental aspects of our universe's causal structure. In Einstein's special relativity, the speed of light creates a cosmic speed limit for information transfer. This has profound implications for how we can receive information. When an event occurs at some distance from us, the information about that event, carried by light or any other signal, must travel across that distance to reach us. During this travel time, the information is effectively moving from the event's past to our present. By the time we receive the information, the event itself is already in our past. The upshot is that the future cannot be known, and information can only be received from the past.
Then of course there is no truth or facts in the future, only estimates of events. That is very interesting, and it is amazing that a physical law like special relativity has ethical implications regarding truth as a necessity to estimate the future. Is lying an ethical issue because it can give an inaccurate estimate of the future and give us a poor estimate of events that may occur in the future? Is this one of the reasons lying is an ethical issue?
Your question touches on a fascinating dimension of why lying is considered an ethical issue. Let me explore the idea. Your insight about lying disrupting our ability to estimate future events is particularly astute. From a survival perspective, this creates several problems related to predictive accuracy. Humans rely on truth to convert information to knowledge, and it is knowledge that allows us to make decisions that can affect our security in the future. In other words, Decisions made in the present based on truthful knowledge can lead to the probability of more favorable outcomes in the future. Lies introduce false data points that compromise our predictive models of reality. An innate sense of truth and a reverence for truth is a human pattern of survival that has benefited our ability to evolve as a successful species.
Is lying an ethical issue because it diminishes trust throughout society?
Lying is indeed an ethical issue because it disrupts human relations. Being a social animal is one of our patterns of survival. Trust forms the foundation of human cooperation and social bonds. When someone lies, they violate this trust, which can damage or destroy relationships that are essential for human flourishing. Groups that cannot rely on truthful communication face coordination problems that put them at a disadvantage compared to groups with higher truth-telling norms.
Is this one of the reasons we have contempt for liars?
Our contempt for liars likely evolved as an emotional mechanism to discourage deception within social groups. This emotion serves as an internal enforcement mechanism that helps maintain the information integrity necessary for group survival. This perspective about lying aligns with the thinking of evolutionary philosophers when providing an evolutionary foundation for our ethical stance toward lying.
In Dante's Divine Comedy, he puts liars and traitors to kin deeper in hell than he does individual murders. Do you think he was correct in that assessment, particularly since you said that wholesale lying can disrupt the very fabric of our society?
This is an interesting philosophical question about Dante's moral hierarchy in the Divine Comedy. Looking at Dante's Inferno, he does indeed place certain types of fraudsters and deceivers deeper in hell, in the 8th and 9th circles, than many violent offenders, including murderers, who are primarily in the 7th circle. This moral ranking reflects Dante's medieval Christian worldview, which placed special emphasis on sins that corrupt social bonds and trust.
In Dante's Inferno, is the journey through hell an allegory about a moral framework?
Yes, Dante's journey through hell in the Inferno is widely considered an allegory. It's not just a literal description of a journey through a physical place, but also a symbolic representation of the soul's journey through sin and its consequences. According to Dante's moral framework, violence is a sin of passion or bestial nature, while fraud requires the distinctly human capacity for reason.
Why is misuse for the human capacity to reason more egregious than a single murder?
What it does is pervert the human capacity for reason toward evil ends. For Dante, the misuse of our uniquely human gift of reason was considered more grievous than acting on violent impulses. From an evolutionary ethics perspective, this has interesting implications. Human societies evolved through cooperation and trust networks. Deception that undermines social cohesion could potentially harm more people than isolated acts of violence by eroding the foundational trust that allows societies to function and, as you said, disrupt the very fabric of society.
Dante appears to be a profound individual. Let me ask you, do animals that do not have a complex language experience an inner sense of truth? Or is the concept of truth, as we understand it, exist only when there is the use of a complex language?
This is a fascinating philosophical question about the relationship between language, truth, and animal cognition. Let me explore this with you. The question of whether animals without complex language can experience an inner sense of truth touches on several philosophical domains including epistemology, philosophy of mind, and comparative cognition. We might consider several aspects of this question.
What aspects could be considered?
There appears to be a meaningful distinction between detecting regularities in the environment and possessing a concept of truth as humans understand it. Animals clearly respond to their environments in ways that suggest they track what we might call correspondence with reality. They avoid predators, find food, and navigate their environments successfully.
That is very interesting. Could you expand on the differences between our sense of truth and the sense of reality of other animals?
The concept of truth as humans understand it seems to involve several higher-order capabilities not present in other animals. They include the ability to represent propositions, statements that can be true or false, the ability to evaluate these propositions against reality or other criteria, the ability to understand truth as an abstract concept independent of specific situations. Without language that allows for propositional structure, it's difficult to see how animals could form the kinds of representations that would be needed for an inner sense of truth in the full human sense.
Are you saying that the difference is binary? In other words, our inner sense of truth which co-evolved with our use of complex language has not occurred in any other species.
Basically, yes. That said, the distinction may not be absolutely binary. Some research in animal cognition suggests more sophisticated representational abilities than previously thought. Some primates, chimps and bonobos, corvids, ravens, crows, and cetaceans, dolphins, whales, demonstrate behaviors that suggest they may have proto-concepts that approach some aspects of what we consider truth tracking. Also, behaviorists have clearly demonstrated in condition response studies that animals of all levels of intelligence respond to various forms of conditioning. Nevertheless, truth tracking and condition response characteristics, although relate to the environment based on a reality, they are not truths as we understand it. Currently, that only exists in Homo sapiens.
Since truth is intertwined with the evolution of a complex language, do you think wholesale lying diminishes the use of language as a means of communication? Do you think language would be gibberish if wholesale lying were accepted as the norm?
Yes, the presence of wholesale lying within a society would greatly diminish the use of language. Early on in the evolution of the ability to use language within societies of Homo sapiens, and possibly before that, meaning within other species of the genus Homo ancestral to sapiens, there developed an inherent sense of truth to accompany the evolution of language. We are social animals. Our sociality is an important pattern of our survival. What's particularly interesting is that this truth sense likely emerged not just as an individual cognitive skill but as part of our social cognition. We evolved to collectively negotiate what counts as true within communities. This co-evolution hypothesis suggests that language without a sense of truth would indeed be functionally gibberish, just sounds without the crucial connection to shared reality that makes communication possible.
Do you think the evolution of complex language, with grammar and syntax, is the only thing that has enabled us Homo sapiens to evolve an inner sense of truth?
The evolution of complex language with grammar and syntax is by far the most important aspect of our evolution that requires a co-evolution of an inner sense of truth. As language developed, which could have been for several millions of years, there had to be a concurrent evolution of an innate sense of truth. As language emerged, it created evolutionary pressure for a more sophisticated truth sense. For language to function as a cooperative tool, there needed to be a shared understanding that utterances could correspond, or fail to correspond, with reality. Thus, there are other aspects of our nature that co-evolved.
What other aspects of our nature co-evolved with language and an inner sense of truth?
Your question is insightful, for it suggests our ancestors didn't just evolve grammar and syntax in isolation but simultaneously developed cognitive architectures for evaluating truth claims. This would include the capacity to hold mental models of reality against which statements could be compared, along with the ability to recognize logical and factual contradictions, which include social cognitive skills to assess speaker reliability and intentions. Actually, the use of complex language and an inner sense of truth was the birth of logic. I use the term reverence for the truth, for truth should be held in a holy place.
You mentioned mechanisms to identify and potentially punish deception. But this is ubiquitous and exists in many species of social animals, and it probably evolved long before we evolved a complex language and an inner sense of truth.
Yes, you are right about that. But the evolution of a complex language accompanied by an inner sense of truth facilitated the survival and differential reproductive success of Homo sapiens. It is an enormously important trait of Homo sapiens. It is one of those things that sets us apart from other species. In addition, besides rendering the development of a complex language impossible, when there is wholesale lying within a society, that is the misuse of this wonderful, evolved trait we call language. It lessens trust and goodwill between individuals and, as we previously mentioned, tears the very fabric of that society.
So, wholesale lying is a grievous wrong, particularly in democratic societies. Do you think democracies require a higher standard of truth than autocratic societies?
Your question cuts to the heart of how our evolved sense of truth shapes governance structures. I think democracies do indeed demand a particular relationship with truth that other governance systems may not require to the same degree. Democracy functions effectively only when there's a shared commitment to certain epistemic values, a collective agreement about how we determine what's true. In democratic societies, the survival pattern includes distributed decision-making power, which necessitates a populace capable of evaluating competing truth claims. Information systems that reliably transmit reality, which include free press, education, cultural norms that value evidence and reasoned debate, along with institutional checks that correct for individual biases and falsehoods.
Assume a political figure who wishes to gain autocratic control by wholesale lying. Would it serve that person well to discredit or control the truth-checking mechanisms of a democratic society? I mean of the military, Justice Department, the judges and lawyers of courts, the press, social media and its education systems.
Yes, it would, and historically this has been done. Contrasting democracies with autocracies, autocratic governance patterns can sometimes survive, at least temporarily, through control of information rather than through consensus building around shared truths.
You mentioned the term epistemic. What do you mean by epistemic?
Epistemic relates to knowledge, understanding, and the study of how we know what we know. It comes from epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy concerned with the theory of knowledge. When something is described as epistemic, it pertains to how we acquire knowledge, how we justify our beliefs, what counts as evidence, the reliability of different ways of knowing, and the standards we use to evaluate truth claims. When discussing democracy and truth, I used epistemic to describe the knowledge-related foundations that democracies depend on, the shared methods and standards a society uses to determine what's true and how we should make decisions based on that knowledge.
What kind of epistemic values should democracy have?
Epistemic values in a democracy might include valuing evidence-based reasoning, recognizing the importance of expertise while maintaining healthy skepticism, being open to revising beliefs when new information emerges, having shared standards for what constitutes reliable information. These epistemic practices are distinct from, yet fundamentally connected to, the political and social aspects of democracy.
Do you think that the standard bearers of truth, which could be government institutions, the courts, the press, the public on social media, educational institutions and the office of the President of the United States should abide by those epistemic values?
Most definitely, all of them should have the epistemic values we discussed, with an emphasis of abiding by the truth when converting information into knowledge. This is particularly true if we wish to sustain a democratic society. Those institutions that are assumed to be the standard bearers of truth are given great latitude for free speech under the First Amendment. When they intentionally trash it for coin or position, it is an egregious sin. A great disservice to our democracy. Such behavior, when continuous, is a behavior devoid of remorse, guilt, shame, and regret. A behavior that is indicative of extremely poor character.
If a person who is elected to lead a country is a perpetual liar and accumulates a group of officials to govern because they support the lies while knowing they are lies, would this be particularly dangerous to the social structure of that society, and if so, why is it dangerous?
This is an interesting philosophical and sociological question about leadership, truth, and social structures. When a person in authority consistently lies and surrounds themselves with officials who knowingly support these falsehoods, it creates several significant dangers to the social structure. Trust erosion is an immediate concern when leadership consistently misrepresents reality as public trust in its institutions deteriorates.
That sounds ominous. Is there anything else that can be said about a group of high-ranking public officials who consistently support a political leader's lies?
Trust is the foundation upon which functional societies operate. When it collapses, cooperation becomes difficult across all levels of society. This arrangement also corrupts information flows. When truth becomes subordinate to loyalty, decision-making throughout the system becomes distorted and officials begin making choices based on what aligns with the leader's narrative rather than what addresses actual problems over time. This creates a dangerous normalization of dishonesty. When lying becomes standard practice at the highest levels, it can permeate throughout society, undermining shared norms about truth-telling and accountability.
What is the most concerning aspect of governance that is accompanied by ubiquitous lying?
Perhaps what is most concerning is the potential for authoritarianism. When a leader's statements cannot be challenged with facts, power becomes increasingly concentrated, and reality itself becomes subject to the leader's definition.
Let me ask you, which do you feel is a more correct aphorism? The aphorism, "You must believe to know," or the aphorism, "You must know to believe"?
This question touches on a fundamental tension in epistemology that I find particularly intriguing. I think the relationship between belief and knowledge is bidirectional but asymmetrical. Knowledge requires belief as a component, along with truth and justification, in the classical formulation. But the stronger claim is that knowing enables deeper, more stable believing. From an evolutionary perspective, our capacity for knowledge likely emerged from more primitive belief formation mechanisms. Early humans formed beliefs based on pattern recognition and social learning before developing more sophisticated knowledge systems with explicit justification. However, once knowledge systems develop, they transform the nature of belief itself.
That is very interesting. Can you expand on the point of belief with knowledge transforms the nature of belief?
When we genuinely know something, when we have well-justified true beliefs supported by evidence, that is, correspondence to the facts, and also logical coherence. This broader understanding creates a qualitatively different kind of belief. This knowledge-backed belief is more resistant to distortion and more adaptively connected to reality. So, while technically you must believe, in the sense that belief is a component of knowledge, I find it more meaningful to say you must know to truly believe, at least in the fullest sense of belief as a stable, reality-tracking cognitive state. Without the grounding of knowledge, beliefs remain fragile and susceptible to manipulation. This relates to our discussion of democracy and truth. Democratic societies require citizens whose beliefs are anchored in genuine knowledge rather than mere opinion or tribal allegiance.
Is there not a connection between truth, knowing and believing and ethical conduct in the philosophies of Plato and later of Kant?
Yes, there is indeed a profound connection between knowing, believing, and ethical conduct in both Plato and Kant's philosophies, despite their separation by over 2 millennia. However, there is a key distinction. For Plato, truth directly generates virtue when properly grasped. Knowing the truth about the good leads automatically to good action. For Kant, truth is necessary but insufficient. One must also commit to duty based on recognition of moral truth. In both philosophies, truth serves as a foundation for knowing and ethics, but Kant introduces an additional element of commitment beyond mere recognition of truth. The virtuous Kantian not only knows the truth about moral law but faithfully adheres to it through duty, while the virtuous Platonic person is transformed by their direct apprehension of the truth of the good.
Do the military academies have mottos and honor codes that employ Platonic virtues and Kantian ethics?
Yes. The 3 major U.S. military academies each have honor codes or mottos that reflect Kantian and Platonic ideals regarding truth, duty, and honor. Here are the core sayings from each. United States Military Academy, West Point, has an honor code which states, "A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do." Their motto is, "Duty, honor, country." The United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, has an honor concept that states, "Midshipmen are persons of integrity. They stand for that which is right." Their honor code is, "Midshipmen are persons of integrity. They do not lie, cheat, or steal." The United States Air Force Academy, located just north of Colorado Springs, has an honor code which states, "We will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does." They have a statement of core values that says, "Integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do." These codes serve as deontological frameworks, duty-based ethics, that guide the moral.
That's comforting. May I ask, can believing in a state of ignorance muddle our admission or recognition of the truth? Is this not a primitive feeling state that can render one impervious to reality and the truth?
Your question touches on a profound psychological and epistemological insight. Yes, existing in a state of ignorance can indeed muddle our recognition of truth, creating what might be called a primitive feeling state that renders us impervious to reality. This phenomenon operates on several levels.
Can you further describe these levels?
First, there's the paradox of ignorance itself. When we don't know what we don't know, we lack the conceptual framework to recognize our own limitations. This is what philosophers since Socrates have recognized as a particularly dangerous form of ignorance, not merely lacking knowledge, but lacking awareness of that lack. Second, Belief systems can create powerful psychological defenses against contradictory information. When we've invested emotionally in certain beliefs, encountering contradictory truths creates cognitive dissonance. Rather than update our beliefs, which require effort and sometimes painful recognition of error, we often reject or reinterpret the new information to preserve our existing worldview. This can manifest as what you aptly described as a primitive feeling state, an emotional rather than rational response that shields us from uncomfortable truths. The emotional security of remaining within a familiar belief system often overrides the rational desire to.
This concludes our first interview, which examined the nature and origin of truth. We will continue with an additional interview examining whether our political figures adhere to abiding by the truth. I wish to thank Alaric and all of you who participated in this discussion.